Welcome back to Clarity Combos for Wedding Pros podcast. I'm your host, Aislinn, and today we have a very special guest. I'm so excited. Leah, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited because today we are going to be talking about how to have your contract and your agreement back up your boundaries and process as a wedding pro. And you are the expert in this. So I'm so excited to have you on today. Can you please give our audience just a little bit of overview of who you are, what you do, maybe a little bit of your background?
Of course. Yeah. I feel like hopefully everybody's still equally excited after the end of this podcast and not just scared to death. But anyway, hi, I'm Leah Weinberg. I am an attorney, a recovering wedding planner, and I am also the author of a book called The Wedding Roller Coaster. So I've been telling folks that I have reached my full circle moment in my life because I started out my adult life as a commercial real estate attorney, practiced law for close to 10 years. Towards the tail end of that, I started my event planning company called ColourPop Events, which was based here in New York City. I was a wedding planner for close to 10 years and then decided to wrap up ColourPop at the end of 2022 and go back to practicing law at the beginning of 2023. So like literally full circle moment that I never expected to happen, but here we are and it's been pretty fantastic so far.
Okay, number one, I'm so proud of you. It is hard to get out of the wedding industry. It's hard to retire. It's hard to go on to different careers. And the fact that you had your full circle moment, I freaking love that so much for you. And I know it's got to feel really good to have hit that moment where you're just like, okay, the things that I started out to do, I've completed, and now we're on to the next loop.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. I mean, if you had asked me, even up until 2021, I would have sworn I would have never gone back to practicing law. But here we are. And I have to acknowledge that it was truly a privilege to have a career to be able to fall back on because, not everybody can kind of leave and have sort of a built-in career to do it. So yeah, I've been super lucky so far.
I love that. I was a wedding photographer for 14 years and then retired in 2022. So I'm in the same season of just okay, we're in the new thing. And it's so cool to look back on my career with so much gratitude and look back on my career with just so much love and also completion energy,
Yes. Yeah. And also COVID kind of ruined everything. I say it sped up I wasn't going to be a wedding planner forever, obviously, but COVID definitely sped up my exit plan for sure.
Same. I feel like COVID, those years, I was by far the best version of myself as a photographer and as a business owner to my clients. But I also started to recognize the physicalities of weddings. I had been ignoring the physicality of it for a long time. And then around that time, I was just I think I might want to try something else. I think I might want to be at my house more often and be in control of my body a little bit more. And so, yeah, it's interesting how that affected different people in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Even 2 years into going back to being a lawyer, the novelty of having my Saturdays to myself is still pretty fantastic. That's not the joy of that has not worn off yet.
I'm not trying to rub this into the audience either. Sorry, guys. These are the retirement conversations you can look forward to. Well, I love that you said that you're a recovering wedding planner. That made me laugh really hard when I read that because I see a lot of my friends who have retired, they definitely kind of have this vibe of retirement or recovering or just kind of I'm done with that season now. So can you tell me a little bit more about that transition of being an author and attorney, going from wedding planning to that?
Yeah, it's so weird to say. It's almost kind of like a happy accident. So, the background is when I started my legal career, it was not very long into my legal career. I started working at big law firms. And it was very soon into that period of my life where I was I think I'm really meant to be my own boss and have my own business. Cause I was always paying attention to how things were run and understanding the management aspect of it. And I'm always was just why are we doing it this way? I was obviously a very good employee. I'm not telling people senior to me how to do their jobs, but it was something that I just very clearly noticed was how much I was paying attention to the business side of it. And I was ready to get out of that for a very long time. It took me a while to get out of law the first time around, and I really wanted to open my own business, and event planning seemed like a really great fit for that. And so ColourPop Events officially started in 2013, and so I made it like 10 years. And like I said, COVID and just especially for planners, that period of time was really difficult in terms of just the overwhelm of how busy you were, but then also being responsible for so many vendors who were also going through their own stuff with being short-staffed and them being busy, and everything was kind of just falling back on the planner. And I was finally just like, this is not what I want to do. And so I finished out. I had made the decision in 2021 that I was going to just stop taking weddings, and I had a full calendar for 2022. So I finished those out, decided that I wanted to go back to being a lawyer. But this time the catch was, number one, I was going to do it for myself. I was going to be my own boss. And number two, I wanted to work with wedding professionals because I'd spent 10 years as a planner seeing everybody's contracts, for better or for worse, but also understanding their businesses. Like, a planner sees it all. So I felt like I had a unique perspective, as opposed to there's a couple of other folks who are former wedding professionals that are also attorneys, but they weren't in the position of being a planner to kind of see everything and see everybody's contracts. And so, yeah, it really made perfect sense. Like, it really was kind of a happy accident to be able to fall into this niche for myself.
I love this. I think it's so needed as well. Like, I can name on I think one hand the amount of people that I know who were wedding professionals or are wedding professionals who are also attorneys or have some kind of contract law background. I don't think there's that many people who really understand the intricacies of vendors and the intricacies of the contracts that need to be in place. And so I love that this is your niche. And I think one of the things I kind of want to dive into is what were some of the mistakes that you saw when you were a wedding planner, looking at other vendors' tracks? What were the big glaring, goodness gracious, please don't ever do this again kind of mistakes that you saw?
One of the biggest red flags that I saw, and this was I still see it to this day in a lot of people's contracts, but free termination rights. So having a venue or a vendor have the right to freely terminate a contract. And yes, of course, there's going to be there's monetary consequences of doing that. You can't just terminate somebody's contract and keep all their money. However, and I always give this example, think about if you were getting married or if you were working with a client and they signed a contract with a venue, and that venue contract had a free termination right. And it simply said that the venue has the right to terminate. All they have to do is just give all the money back and then wash their hands of it. They're clean. The week of the wedding, that venue gets approached by a huge celebrity event or something like that. Something that's going to bring in 3-4 times the amount of revenue that this wedding was going to bring in. And they have a free termination right in their contract. And they're doing that cost benefit analysis in their head of, is this huge payday and the promotion of doing this really high profile event, is this worth essentially burning this other couple and having one bad review, even though we are fully able to do it under the terms of our contract? They're going to take that celebrity event, and then your client's going to be high and dry without a venue just days before their wedding. And it was all completely permitted under the contract. And so that free termination right is that sneaky little thing that I see in people's contracts here and there. And so I'm always saying it should be termination only for cause on both sides. You as a vendor, you are promising to perform a service for somebody. The people getting married, they are promising to pay your fees in exchange for that service. We need to be bound by that contract. We shouldn't be able to get out of that agreement unless something happens and somebody's doing something they're not supposed to.
I can hear all of the scattering of feet of all the photographers and vendors listening to this episode right now.
Doing a word search to see what's in their contracts.
Can I put this in there? If you are listening to this episode right now, I want you to pause and go pull up your contract, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be more things that we're going to talk about that you're going to want to go look at. I love this. I love that you have like very specific examples of things that like people might have in their contract. It's interesting because like so many wedding professionals will cobble together contracts in the very beginning of their careers, and they never really understand like when is that point when you need like an actual real contract that's done up by a lawyer or maybe as a template and then looked at by a lawyer or
Yep.
attorney. And for me, as soon as you can, as
Yep.
soon as you can put down the money to have a attorney or like an actual good template, do it. I would
Yep.
rather you spend money on a really good airtight contract than new gear this year. Like
Yeah.
you don't need a new lens, you need an airtight contract. So
Yeah.
I would love to kind of dig into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what you said, I really want to touch in, like, go a little bit deeper into the whole, like, kind of cobbling together a contract thing, because we always say don't do it, but I don't always get a chance to explain why, and there are like real tangible consequences to doing it. And so a few of those things are, number one, the risk of having conflicting provisions in your contract. Like if you are not a lawyer, if you are not savvy in terms of legal drafting and reviewing things, if you get a provision from a friend or in a Facebook group, hey, everybody listening, stop taking legal advice from people in Facebook groups. But if you just copy and paste something or from Google and you don't really know, like you run a risk of putting something in that directly conflicts with something else. I've seen people with two completely conflicting provisions on cancellation when it comes to a force majeure event. I've seen somebody's contract with conflicting provisions where there's like a binding arbitration provision and then another provision that says all disputes have to be handled in court. So it's like, what are we don't really know what to do there. The other risk is, so things that conflict, things just being not clearly drafted, different defined terms, like referring to yourself as photographer in one place, company in another place, vendor in another place. We don't want to do that. Also, I want you to understand your contract. And if you aren't working with an attorney or don't have a template that's, comes with kind of those explanatory notes, it's highly likely that you're not going to be able to explain the provisions in your contract. If your clients ask questions, I want you to be able to defend your contract. So that's super important. And then the other really big one is you might be putting something in there that's not enforceable in your state. Perfect example of this, because this comes up a lot, very hot topic, of if you happen to be passing along whether you can pass along credit card fees to your client. I know there's a very high level, like, should you not, and we won't get into that. But from a legal perspective, not all states allow you to do that. And some states, if you are allowed to do it, you have to do it in a very specific way. New York is a perfect example. So in New York, if you want to pass on the credit card fees to your client, you are not allowed to say, here is my fee, and then it's an extra 3% if you pay by credit card. The way you have to phrase it is, here is my fee, and if you pay by cash or check, you get a 3% discount. So if you are just copying and pasting somebody's provisions, you run the risk of putting something in that's not going to be enforceable in your state.
I love that. I love that so much. And one of the things that I will say is there are a lot more experts out there than you think that you can ask these questions to and like pay them to get their like legal advice. So I remember back in, I think it was like 2018, 2019, it might have been a little bit earlier than that. I actually paid for a 30-minute phone call with an attorney to go over a contract and go over writing a new addendum to a contract. I had some kind of situation going on where I needed help. And I was like, I'm not going to play the game of I'm an expert in this because I'm not. So I was able to like get in touch with someone who I could pay $150 for a 30-minute phone call, get my little addendum written correctly for my state. And then I was able to do what I needed to do with that situation. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, what do I do? Like, I have a cobbled together contract, or I don't know like what to do in this situation. There are people out there. Leah, I'm sure you know people like who do this as well. You might as well be a person that like you can pay for your expertise.
Yep, absolutely.
I love that. So how can we make sure our process is backed up by our contract? So what I mean by this is a lot of photographers and a lot of wedding professionals will have these cobbled together contracts, or maybe you do have a good contract. And I'm like very proud of you if you have a good contract, but you might not have your process outlined in your contract. So for example, if your clients are only supposed to communicate with you via email, if that's like, maybe that's part of like your process. But then inside of your contract, it says call this phone number. Inside of your contract, it says you have unlimited meetings. Your clients, you've signed a contract with your clients around that kind of stuff. So I'd love to kind of dig deeper into this.
Yes. Yeah. So first of all, anybody out there, especially planners who are listening to this, if your description of services says unlimited communication, I want you to go and change that right now. And we want it to say ongoing communication, not unlimited, because we all know we've had those clients that will abuse that particular line in your contract. So that, yes. So I think number one, I mean, even beyond like outside of the legal part, this does require you to kind of sit down and spend some time in your business and outline what your process is. And then also what your boundaries are. And we'll get to the kind of the boundary piece in a minute. But like, let's say for my photographers, this is going to be about, okay, how long after the event is this delivery going to happen? What is included in your editing process? What is outside the scope of your editing process? And what are you willing to do for an additional fee? I know some people, honestly, like they have a standard editing process, and some of them say that heavy retouching, like they won't even do. They won't do that. That's not in their wheelhouse to do. So they have to outsource that. Some people can do the heavy retouching, but they want to charge a fee for that. What does the like the delivery of the photos look like? How is that being delivered? If you offer albums, what is the process for that? Particularly for photographers, setting an outside deadline for your clients to use that album credit and get that album done so that you are not sitting there and 3 years later, they finally decide to get their act together and do an album.
I kid you not, that happened to me last year. I had clients come back almost 5 years after their wedding date, and I went back and I looked at their contract, and I didn't have the contract that I had towards the end of my career. Guess who had to pay for albums 5 years later after I retired and I don't have that company anymore? Luckily, I was able, it was all very like amicable, and like the clients are so nice that like I was able to like make it work. But like this right here, you need to have like an outro basically to like your album process. It can't just be this like outstanding stuff of like, you get an album, and if you never tell me what's going in the album, you can come back later. Like you don't want to be dealing with that 3 or 4 years later. It's very sad, and you'll be very annoyed with yourself.
Yes. And also like to that point too, how long you store things. I had a couple come back to me 4 years after their wedding asking for their video because they never downloaded it.
Oof.
Yeah. So yes. So that kind of process, if you are a stationer, I think stationers, I don't know, I feel like what intimidates stationers a little bit when we're working on their contracts together, because I really kind of make them get so specific about their process. But it's like if you're designing something, the pain points I always hear from like graphic designers, stationery, like paper designers, is the revisions and the back and forth and like just things being done and finalized and approved, and then somebody changes their mind. And so like if you're a stationer, we want to know really, we get into the nitty gritty of like, what is that back and forth process? Like you get like what's your deadline for giving them something? Then how long do they have to get your revisions? Once they get your revisions, how long do you have to flip it back to them? And how many rounds of revisions do they get? Like we really get into the nitty gritty. So you should understand your business's process and make sure there's obviously some things that you don't have to always outline, but like how many meetings are included as part of your process, what time frame people can expect for things. With florists, like you're going to have maybe an initial meeting up front, but we all know you're going to have that final design meeting where you go through everything from head to toe. Maybe you do mock-ups, things like that. We want to have all of that in the contract so that the client knows what's coming, so that their responsibilities related to those things also are contractual obligations. So like if they do have to approve something within 48, that's a contractual obligation of theirs.
Yeah. I like to think of it like if then logic. If this, then that. So like, and we could talk about it and say like it's consequences, but like you really need to think through your process and like, okay, if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. So like if they don't get back to me within 48 hours, what happens? If they do get back to me within 48 hours, okay, cool. That logic is good. Move on to the next one.
Yes.
So I think I love that. I think that's such a great way to think about it. And I think a lot of people like just get really stuck in like, oh, what is my process? Like, oh, what does other photographers do? What do other stationers do? And it's like, you really have to sit with yourself if you are trying to be a sustainable, long-term, profitable business owner.
Yeah.
these are the kind of things that we have to look at. And it can come from so many different angles. Of course, we want to talk about it from the marketing side and from the like creative side and like the business side, but we also have to look at it from the legal side as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what are some boundaries that wedding photographers or other wedding professionals should be putting in place, like both in their process, but also in the contract? What could that look like?
You've already brought up a big one, which is method of communication and office hours as well. So I was an avid no texting, no substantive text messages. I mean, I'd have people trying to text me changes to their guest count or guest substitutions, and I'm like, nope. Put that in an email because I need to file it. I need to have it in writing and I need to file it. I also know people that are completely fine substantively texting their clients. I just want whatever you are comfortable with. I want that to be stated in your contract as to like what your preferred method of communication is. I want you to back that up. So if your contract says only method of communication is email and scheduled phone calls or scheduled in-person meetings, and they decide to text you something, I want you to redirect that text message back to email. And it can be really simple. Just say, hey, I've got like received, I'm going to respond to this in an email just so we can have everything, in writing and in savable form, things like that. So yeah, method of communication, office hours can also be helpful. And like I said, you have to enforce it. You have to behave in accordance with what you are the boundaries you are trying to establish with people. So if you have office hours, we all know you're probably answering emails on weekends, but set that. The Google schedule send, I think, is one of the greatest inventions ever because you can type up your response whenever and just schedule it to send during normal business hours. And it's so much about like, even with the contract, it's so much about kind of training your clients as to how they can expect, when they can expect to hear from you, how they can expect to interact with you. Like if you make, let's say it's slow season and you make exceptions and you email clients on weekends or constantly schedule phone calls with them, like in January, then when busy season starts and you become completely unavailable, they are going to probably get a little persnickety about that because they're used to being able to get a hold of you. And even though sure, maybe it is in your contract or you gave them a heads up about it, you have set that precedent as to when you are going to be available. It's really important to figure out your boundaries and enforce them. One of my favorite ways to try to figure out what boundaries you want to set is to ask yourself the question, what gives me anxiety? And I know for wedding professionals, like that's a very loaded question because there's probably a lot of things. But if getting those substantive text messages make you a little queasy, if it's dealing with somebody other than the client, so like if you're dealing with parents, there's a whole conversation of like, I really want you signing contracts with the people who are getting married, and the parents can sign what we call a third-party payor addendum if they really want to sign something, but your clients are the people who are getting married. And if you don't want to be dealing with those outside third parties, set that boundary. You can put it in your contract. I have people that put it in their contract all the time that they're not going to deal with a third party. If a third party becomes disruptive, they don't have to deal with them. So think about what it is that really just gets under your skin or makes you feel not so great when it happens. And like, that's the boundary that you need to set.
Yeah. I also think like thinking about like, who am I in my busiest season? Those are the boundaries I want to hold and the standards I want to hold in my contract so that like you can say essentially like my boundaries are my boundaries. I get to decide whether or not we're going to email on the weekend, but my boundaries say XYZ and my process says XYZ inside of my contract. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to refer back to my contract to enforce things in a really loving way. And in a like, I'm here to have a co-creative relationship with my clients kind of way, but it allows you guys to like almost like work within parameters that's a win for you and a win for your clients, because having very unclear parameters for people, that's when people get into shenanigans.
Yes, exactly. And having it in your contract makes it so it takes the emotion out of it. Like it's not like, oh, I've got to have this really awkward thing about telling them that, oh, actually, you know what? I don't accept meetings on the weekends. Well, if it's in your contract, it makes it very easy to, like you said, lovingly, politely, gently refer back to your contract and remind them of what they agreed to at the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like we've talked a lot about like things to put in your contract, but what happens if like you already have people who have signed contracts? So I would love to kind of dig into like, it's 2025. Like, let's say like you have clients this year who have already signed contracts, but your boundaries are changing, or maybe part of your process is changing. What are some different things that people can do in those kind of situations?
Yeah, it depends on exactly the level of what is changing. Like if it's something that's kind of changing the terms of your contract, that's not necessarily like you can't kind of change business terms midstream. Like let's say you decided, oh, now my contract's all said, I would get photos back within 12 weeks. Now just kidding, I really need 16. In good faith, we can't go back and change that in our contracts. But like, let's say your contract was silent on like your office hours. Maybe so then that's something like just kind of let your clients know like, hey, start of the new year, I wanted to just let you know I'm going to be maintaining office hours this year. This is when I will be available. Let them know for emergencies, you're reachable, responsive. But as long as you're doing your job, what you have been paid for, what you have put in your contract that you are going to be doing, I think most times setting these boundaries after the fact will be met with understanding. Of course, there are going to be those clients that's not the case for. We've all had those. We know who those people are. But I think in most cases, like you can kind of let people know like, hey, this year, if you have kids, my resolution was to spend more time with my kids on the weekends. So now I'm not going to be available as much for like a site visit or for an in-person meeting, but I'm happy to accommodate you during the week. Like just let them know it's life. We're all humans. I think when we take the human approach and talk about ourselves as humans as well, that's what's going to go over best with our clients.
I love that. Are there any contract clauses or any things that like you're like, this was the best thing ever to see in a contract? Like as a wedding planner, when you would see it in somebody else's contract where you're like, yes, good.
There's a lot of them. I mean, if I had to name something like right now, I just know, just given everything that's been happening in a lot of different places lately, like your rescheduling and terminate and cancellation and force majeure provisions, those are really, I think, the ones that have a huge impact because things are becoming really unpredictable in terms of weather, in terms of pandemics and things like that. So those are the provisions I think that a lot of people, if you can spend time, make sure that those really reflect your policies and work with an attorney on those provisions, like those are super important. But it's endless. There are so many provisions that I think people need to have, and some things are super specific to different vendor categories and some are universal across vendor categories. So yeah, like we've already kind of harped on, like try to budget in this year to work with an attorney on your contract. Like it's super important. It may seem like a big investment, but I promise you it's going to save you money on the back end when something happens.
Yeah, I think that's something I kind of want to dig into a little bit is like budget and kind of like what does this even look like and like what does it look like to find an attorney? What does it look like to get a contract like made by an attorney versus going the like template route? Like just kind of like what in general would you say it would cost to have an attorney look at an existing contract that is already like made versus having someone draw up a completely new one versus doing the template route? They're all valid routes. So yeah. I'm just kind of curious if you know the price points or ranges for things.
It's really, I'm going to do the lawyer thing and I'm going to say it depends because it does kind of really depend. That is like a lawyer's favorite thing to say and I hate being the cliche, but because everybody handles it so differently. And also like a New York City attorney is going to the hourly rate of a New York City attorney is going to be very different from like the hourly rate of an Omaha, Nebraska attorney. Even somebody like in upstate New York, like those prices are going to be very different. Some people charge hourly. Some people charge a flat fee. Here's an interesting, maybe secret, not so secret. It's honestly, if you are working with an experienced attorney, like who does these kind of contracts a lot like myself, it is always faster for me to just give you a new contract than to have to like take yours and finagle language and things like that. And honestly, it's, it's just faster if I can kind of start with like the standard form that I use and then customize that for you as opposed to like going through everything in somebody's contract and like messing with it from there. But we always have that conversation because some people are really, they feel very connected to their existing contracts and they don't want to change things. And in that case, we work on that. Some people are like, just give me the best version of whatever you've got. And so then like we kind of start with my form and then customize things for them. For folks that if budget is an issue, like a template is going to be better than not working with an attorney at all. So I will always say that. It can be a little bit tricky again too, in terms of filling in blanks and really understanding your contract. Nothing is going to top that one-on-one legal service with a lawyer who's going to draft something custom for you. But an attorney drafted template is going to be your next best thing.
Yes, and I think that phrase right there, attorney drafted template, attorney drafted. That's the part that we want to key in on because there are templates out there that are not attorney drafted.
Yeah.
That
Who are these people that aren't attorneys that are selling contract templates? It's horrifying. And I'm very worried for them from a like liability standpoint.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is like, in the wedding industry, people love to share. Like they love to share like their templates and their contracts and stuff like that. It will get you into trouble at some point, whether it's a process that you're trying to back up or it's like an actual like problem that you're trying to like work on. I promise you, like paying an attorney to make you a contract is worth every single penny and then some. It is worth more than gear this year. I think I've already said that. This is one of those things that I always, every single time like a new client comes into Success Accelerator program, every single time I'm like, what kind of contract do you have? Like, I need to know. I don't really care what your gear is. I don't care like what you charge or anything like that right now. I want to know, can you back yourself up? And can you back your process up? And I can't fix it for you. I'm not an attorney, but I can refer my clients to like the different people that I know who do have the contracts that are set up correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of touched on something too, which is if you work with somebody from the start of your business or the second that you do start working with somebody, you then have a relationship with that attorney so that when things go wrong, you've got somebody already to go to. If clients are sending back comments on your contract, you've got somebody who you can ask about those things. My big thing is start a relationship with an attorney before you actually need one, because as we've said, there are not a lot of us. And we all like, unfortunately with lawyers, we are limited by the states where we can practice in. And so like even amongst the small number of us, we definitely don't cover the whole country. And so depending on where you're located, it might take you a little bit longer to find somebody. So I want you to kind of start now so that when you do need somebody, you're not adding the stress of trying to find somebody on top of the stress of whatever the situation is that's already in hand. So like, we'll talk in a little bit about the places that I can serve, but then, talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends, talk to your family. You can just kind of reach out to that network and see who other people are working with. And I really want you to like your attorney. I don't want them to scare you because if you are scared of your attorney, you're going to always hesitate going to your attorney for things. I want you to trust your attorney because it's so important because you are going to have to like be honest about your business, about situations, about things that are happening, about the pain points in your business with this person. So you've got to be able to trust them so that you can be honest. Yeah. And I really want you to get along with your attorney because the law I know is scary enough. And if you get cringy every time you're like, oh, I think I have to call my attorney, I don't want that for you. I want you to have like confidence that you've got somebody backing you up, somebody in your corner, somebody who's going to advocate for you.
I love that perspective so much. I think that like leads me into the question of like, if somebody is looking for an attorney and they like have asked their friends and family, do they need to have someone that is like versed in small business or versed in photography or being a florist? Like, do they need that kind of specificity or is it kind of more broad?
In a perfect world, that is your best person because otherwise what happens, and this is something I hear from people a lot, is they find themselves having to explain their business to the attorney. It is not like, it's never going to be perfect. Like you're not going to just find the unicorn necessarily in your state of somebody who understands the wedding industry. Like, again, we've said there's a very small number of us who understand the wedding industry. So you really are looking for somebody that works with small businesses, somebody who understands client service, because that's just a huge component of it because a lot of things that we see beyond the contract drafting is like client disputes and client relationships. And so you kind of want somebody who understands that small business aspect of serving others and the things that can come up and how we like mediate and resolve and try to negotiate situations when things go wrong. So you definitely want, if you can't find somebody who is well versed in the wedding and events industry, then definitely try to find somebody who works with small businesses. Huge corporate lawyers, it's funny, I've seen a huge corporate lawyer draft like an event pros contract, and it's like, it's okay. It kind of gets the job done, but they don't understand the industry. They don't understand necessarily the nuances. And like when my clients have lawyers as their clients who like are big corporate lawyers, like I can see it. The comments that come back make sense for them in that context, but it doesn't always make sense in the like, especially wedding context, but even small business context. So yeah, you kind of just go from there. So like ideally we want somebody who knows wedding and events. If we don't have that, then we want somebody who ideally works with small business lawyers. If not, somebody just in general well-versed in like corporate law and contracts.
Yeah. And if you can find the person who like can not only draft it for you, but then can be there along the way, like as things come up, that is truly like, that's the unicorn. That's the dream right there.
Yes.
Because I had like problems where like the person who contracted my contract, I had to go back to her because we had some situations where I was like, hey, how do I enforce this? Or hey, like this part right here, like I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly so that I'm explaining it to my clients correctly. And being able to have that kind of relationship was just it helped me to enforce my boundaries more, but it also helped me to serve my clients better and feel more grounded within myself, which I want so badly for all my clients and all my community to feel just that sense of like, okay, I get to go do my job beautifully and perfectly and wonderfully. And I've got my own back.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, what you described is exactly my hope for all of the people that I work with. Like, that's how I want them to feel. I want them just to feel more confident in their business. Like I said, I want them to feel taken care of. I want them to feel supported. And I want them to know that like, if they need something, if something goes wrong, like they have me here. Another one of the common things I hear from people is they're like, I had a lawyer do this and I tried to go back to them to get them to change something, but then I can't ever they never got back to me, or I can't ever get a hold of somebody. Like, I want you to be able to get a hold of a person. I also say, like, if you want somebody to answer your panicked email at 4:00 on a Friday, you're going to need to have a relationship with that person, because nobody other than me is going to answer a panicked email at 4:00 on a Friday unless they have a pre-existing relationship with you. So yeah, it's always helpful just to have somebody, because then like you know who you're going to call when you get that email from a client who's like, we're unhappy, we want money back, or we're unhappy, we want to terminate your services early. Like, you've got that person who you can get in touch with, who's going to help you in that situation. And that's super important to me.
And also being able to say, like, let me go check with my lawyers.
Yes.
Like, that's a very handy phrase.
Sometimes that's scary. Sometimes just saying like, I have, like they think, I mean, some people underestimate small business owners. They think that they don't have their stuff together, and they're kind of banking on this fact that like they don't have a lawyer. And so they try, like, I've seen it. People will, on the other side, will try to scare you into just caving and giving money back because they think that you aren't going to actually go out and hire a lawyer. And so sometimes when a letter comes from me or somebody just says, I've got to get my lawyer involved, that sometimes resolves it, because they know that they can't take advantage of the person.
Yeah. And this is why we want to have such airtight contracts that like back up our process and back up our boundaries. But also, I will always be an advocate for communication is king. Like,
yes.
if you can resolve something by making somebody feel seen, heard, and supported, you very likely won't need to call your lawyer. You very likely won't need to have that backup, because so many things can just be solved in that way. But having the contract to back you up is going to make you feel more solid when you come into that conversation. So it's like kind of two things to think about.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I always say also that like communication can solve so many problems, and people don't always like realize that just like talking through something, we can often get things resolved and try to prevent things from happening in the beginning. Like, if people aren't happy, like, we need to talk about if you are having a client who's not doing what they're supposed to, talk to them, tell them. Same thing, like, we have provisions in your contract so that if your client thinks you're not doing what you're supposed to, they have to give you notice, so that we can have a conversation so that people aren't caught off guard by things. Because I agree. I think so much can be solved just by having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. And clear expectations and clear processes. Like, these are things that I am a huge advocate for.
Yes.
Well, Leah, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. I know that I got a lot out of it, even though I don't have, a wedding industry business anymore. I was like, oh, this podcast would have been so helpful to listen to 5 years ago, like when I was still in the business. But I would love for you to tell our audience, how can people find you? How can they work with you? Do you have any templates? Do you have any like cool things that our audience can dig into?
Absolutely. Okay. So before I get to that, I do have to give everybody my disclaimer about this whole podcast, which was nothing today was meant to be legal advice. This is general information for multiple businesses. There is no attorney-client relationship made by me being on this podcast today and you all listening. But in terms of where to find me, so my law firm is Weinberg Legal. WeinbergLegal.com is the website. You can find me on Instagram at the Leah Weinberg and at Weinberg Legal. So my firm offers one-on-one legal services. I personally am barred in New York and Georgia, so serve clients in those states. The plan is to have of counsel who can serve clients along with me in Illinois, Texas, New Jersey, Florida, and California. So I'm trying to make sure that the firm can kind of cover some of those bigger wedding and event markets to be able to help as many folks as possible. But also, if your state is not listed and you do need something, sometimes I do know I have recommendations in other states as well. So if folks need a recommendation for somebody in their area, feel free to reach out and see if I can provide a referral for you.
That's incredible. I love that you're like already planning on like serving more states than just the ones you currently serve. That's incredible and like so needed in this industry. Need more people like you in this industry. And so I'm just really excited about that. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom today. It was absolutely incredible. I hope that you guys got something actionable out of today's podcast episode. Leah's information is going to be in the show notes below. But if you got something out of this, or if you want to tag us on Instagram, please do. We'd love to hear like what your aha moments were, or did we like call you out in what your contract says and you're like, how dare you? Either of those things are perfectly fine to send us DMs about. But Leah, again, thank you for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate it. And I hope you guys have an absolutely beautiful day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.